Hello and welcome to another episode of Ewell Acres. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the top 5 reasons why produce coming out of your garden tastes a whole lot better than it does coming from the grocery stores. Let's get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're getting value out of these videos, if you like what you're seeing, please don't forget to subscribe. Click on that bell for notifications. Not only does it help us out with YouTube algorithm, but it also helps us so that we can better spread these videos around so we can learn from each other, with each other. So when you're walking around, you've always heard the old adage, what comes out of your garden tastes a whole lot more than what comes out of the grocery store. And you've always indistinctly known, yes, what I grow out of the garden tastes a whole lot better from the grocery store, despite the fact that those that are in the grocery store are farmers. They grow them professionally. And you may be an amateur, you may be a professional too. I myself, for my own farm, actually produce for some grocery stores. And I can tell you, the produce that I sell at my local farmers markets, that I eat myself, is, naturally speaking, going to be a little bit better than, say, another one of my customers that purchases it from the grocery store. And there are some major reasons why that actually happens. So the number one first reason why when you grow from your garden it's going to taste a whole lot better than when you do at the grocery store is because many plants are genetically bred to look really good. They are bred for uniformity. Even if they're heirloom varieties and you're looking to grow them, plants are specifically picked for them looking good. Even if you have great varieties of apples, fruit, other fresh produce and vegetables, you have different tiers and levels of produce. There's going to be tier 1 that is going to be your fresh produce. It looks absolutely delicious. There's no nicks, there's no dings. It is absolutely perfect. Those are going to the grocery stores. Then you have tier 2. They're a little bit roughed up, they're not so pretty, but they're still edible, they are still good. Those are typically going to be chopped up and sold for canning or preserving conditions. Then you have tier 3, which they are not looking good whatsoever. They're bruised, they're misshapen, they're misformed, and they are not very good at all. They are by far the ugly stepchild. Those are either going to be turned into feed for animals because they don't care what it looks like, or they're going to be turned into juices or other highly processed up, mashed up things because, once again, they just care that the produce is edible, not going to harm anyone, because it's going to get pulverized anyway. There is no need to make it look good. So, when you're looking at stuff at the grocery store, they specifically pick things that look good. They may not taste good, but they are sure going to look good. And when you're looking at the grocery store, you are going to shop with your eyes in picking out that produce. Now, along those same lines that tie into number 1 is you shop with your eyes. Oftentimes, when you are going to the grocery store to look for stuff, they are going to harvest them weeks before you are ever going to purchase them on the shelf. And because of that, sometimes those vegetables, that fruit, is going to be on a truck. They're going to be in a warehouse. There's going to be massive transportation times. Even if it's grown locally, it's still going to be several days transition in transport. On my farm, all produce that I sell is going to be locally produced, meaning currently all stores that sell my produce is within 100 miles. Despite that, I'm going to harvest it, put it into storage, put it in my cold refrigerators, and then they're going to go to the grocery store where they sit in their cold produce or the distribution warehouses, which then distribute it out. So oftentimes, it's going to be several days from the point in time when I harvest to when it gets to the actual grocery store. Even said that, that's going to be then the worker at the grocery store or whoever it is will then take my produce and stick it on the shelf at the grocery stores. Well, that produce is going to sit there for potentially days or even a week before a customer comes along and purchases it. And so that produce needs to have a very long shelf life so it will continue to look good for weeks. And so because of that, the varieties that I've chosen to grow for my produce, for my herbs, for my lettuces, the microgreens, other things that I grow, need to be able to look really good on the shelf for weeks on end. Otherwise, if it only lasts a couple days, it's not going to be financially beneficial for the grocery store because they're not going to sell all that produce within a 2 day period of time. And manpower, labor-wise, financially speaking, it does not make sense to send shipments to the grocery stores every single day and have to throw out produce every single day. It just becomes very, very wasteful. And so that's why we choose varieties that are going to be long-lasting for the shelves. Number 2 on the list, why produce in your grocery store is going to not taste as good as your own, has to do of when it's harvested. Typically speaking, when you harvest your produce, there is going to be a shortening length of time in the natural sugars, the natural sweetness in your produce. It's been said that the taste can vary differently from when you first harvest it to even just 12 or 24 hours after, because a lot of those sugars are going to start to turn to starches, naturally turning that food to be a little bit more bitter. And even if you have really delicious varieties, it's going to have a slightly different taste even just 24 hours later because of the natural chemical processes in the sugars in your plant being converted to starches. Number 3, in why there can be a huge difference in your home garden versus what is at the grocery store, has to do with the time of when you harvest. Now, there, with some respiration within plants, typically speaking, the produce or plants that are harvested in early morning are going to be much sweeter than those that are done in the afternoon. Naturally, as a plant breathes, as it's in the air with the sun, it's going to build up a lot more lactic acid in the plants. So your lettuce, if you harvest it in early morning, is going to be much sweeter than your lettuce that you harvest in afternoon when it's bitter. So that's oftentimes, if you have a good farm that does great agriculture practices, if you live in a hot environment, by the time it gets 11, 12 noon, they are going to stop harvesting, which means they're going to have to harvest really early. But that's sometimes what can greatly affect is when that plant is physically harvested. So if you want better produce, harvest in early morning versus in the evening, because then your plant hasn't had time to build up those lactic acids, and that can have a huge difference on the flavor of whatever you're harvesting. Number 4, on the major difference of why your garden produce tastes a whole lot better than that at the grocery store, is going to be the soil and the nutrients that you have. Oftentimes, I've noticed that small gardeners, farmers, marketers, homesteaders, those guys, they're going to be a lot more interested in trying to get and build up the nutrients in your soil long term. Now, if you have a really great high quality commercial farmer, they're going to do the exact same thing. They're going to try and follow a benefit of adding organic matter, adding good nutrients that will help in the long-term health of the soil and growth. Oftentimes, though, many commercial growers, because they're producing so much produce, they are depleting the soil faster than they can naturally build it up. And so they're going to have to use synthetic means to replenish those nutrients. Now, there have been times changing. If they're a good farmer keeping up on the times, there have been many changes that can actually change this out. Good agricultural practices so that they're not constantly dumping in these artificial nutrients to help combat it. Now, inevitably speaking, though, there are going to be times when it is necessary. But a lot of home gardeners have the benefit to grow on a smaller scale, less, because they're not going to have as much of that financial burden to produce, which means if their soil is a little bit depleted, they can, financially speaking, add a lot more nutrients to the soil than the commercial guy. They have to worry about the bottom line a whole lot more. They can't add as much compost, as much goodness to the soil as a home gardener can. With that being said, the different variations of the nutrients, the quality of the soil, will have a dramatic effect on how good or bad that produce tastes. Number 5 on why produce in your home garden tastes a whole lot better than it is in the grocery store has to go back to what we started with number 1, time. When you're dealing with plants and doing that, oftentimes you are going to harvest plants in your home garden when they are ripe, when they're ready to harvest. You can pick them off the vine, eat them, take them right inside. You can make a nice salad that afternoon, eat it. It's going to be able to allow to ripen to satisfaction. But on the side effect, have you ever noticed really ripe strawberries? They bruise a whole lot easier. Lettuce cannot potentially last as long. When you're dealing with a commercial growing setting, you are oftentimes going to have long term in which those plants have to last. You cannot harvest ripe peaches right then and there and then ship them, which 2-3 weeks later they are going to sell on the shelf. You have to pick that fruit when it is still immature. Because that fruit is immature, it's going to be harder. It can handle being transported long-term in trucks. So when they're in the trucks in transportation, they're going to get moved around. They're going to get rattled. They're going to get bruised. With them not being ripe, they're going to more successfully make that journey without being getting damaged to the bottom line towards that customer. With that said, that's why is the fruit is not given the time to naturally gain the sugars. That final 2-week period of time in growing those peaches is the most crucial in that flavor profile. That's what makes the difference between it's not what I remember a peach to be versus this is the best peach I've ever had. Oh my gosh, I'm in heaven. Having that last time effect is when the sugars in the fruit are most developed. Now, one way that we get around that in the commercial setting when you're dealing with peaches is when it's in transportation, you can actually pick them when they're not quite developed. And then when they're in the refrigerator, they will actually use ethylene gas in the maturing process. Now, don't be alarmed. This is a very common practice used across the entire industry. Pretty much all fruits, all vegetables use ethylene gas. Ethylene gas is a natural growth hormone that is naturally produced by fruit as it's ripening. We've just artificially applied it so that way we can control when the fruit actually ripens, and so it'll ripen all at once, making it most beneficial for the end customer, allowing us to better feed a larger population. If you want to try this experiment at home, you can do the exact same thing. Here's what you do. Go to the store, buy a unripened banana that's just completely green. Stick it in the brown lunch sack. Take an apple, stick it in that brown lunch sack, and roll it up. That apple is going to... and then what you do is take a green banana and set it on the counter outside of that green sack, so it's not as much influenced by that. Go ahead and open up that sack after a couple of days and compare that banana that was in the sack versus the one that was sitting on the counter. That apple is going to emit natural ethylene gas that is going to affect the banana, encouraging it to ripen much faster than that banana on the table. So don't worry, it's a natural process. It is very commonly done. I do it all the time with my own bananas when I want it to hurry up a little bit. But one of the side effects is you don't get those sugars to naturally develop to have a better taste profile. So these have been the top 5 reasons why your food in your own home garden tastes a whole lot better from the supermarket. Below, what's your thoughts? Do you prefer eating fruit from the grocery store because it's out of season and you just love it but you can't? Do you prefer stuff in your home garden? What are the advantages versus disadvantages? Let us know in the comments below. Once again, thank you so much for joining us on the top 5 reasons why stuff grown in your home garden is going to be much better than stuff grown that you eat at the grocery store. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so glad you're here. And if you like what we're doing, if you're gaining value out of these videos, please don't forget to subscribe. Click on that bell for notifications. Not only does it help us out with the Utah algorithm, but it helps to spread knowledge so that way we can continue to learn from each other with each other. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.